is going to be about autism and neurodevelopmental delay. There are different types of delays in development, and I'm going to be going through succinctly as possible the different types and the different presentations of such delays. So I've broken it down into cognition, so cognitive delays, motor coordination delays, social and emotional delays, and speech delays. So cognitive delays can come from different areas, and as you can see these areas are quite vast. So, for example, if we look at the first one, meningitis or encephalitis, these delays could come from something that happened during birth, difficulties with birth. So meningitis, an infection of the brain, could affect the cognition of the child. Seizure disorders have a high prevalence on the autism spectrum. So up to 70% of people diagnosed with autism have co-occurring seizure disorders that, of course, come in different presentations, different variants, different ways in which they affect the brain, which in turn has an effect on the person, and which in turn has effect not only on cognition, but other areas of development as well. So different information processing challenges there. There can be chromosomal differences that can affect cognition. And then because this area of cognition is so vast, I have to put other, because there are so many different reasons why someone could have cognitive delays. So I'm just going to bring in a personal example about myself. So part of the reason someone is on the autism spectrum is because of very interlinking factors. So what I mean by that is that these factors aren't autism by themselves. There's other different pieces that make someone autistic. Emphasis on autistic, an autistic presentation. So if I bring myself into the realm of other, the parts of my autism trajectory were brain injury, so hypoxia of the brain, and that was partly to do with a placental abruption, which of course is going to affect different areas of the brain. So cognition could be one of them, speech. In the case of myself, it was the left hemisphere, so it's a part of the brain affected, and the occipital lobes, which is to do with visual retrieval, visual association, etc. So there are many different reasons for cognition and delays in cognition. When we go into motor coordination, you can see the different elements here. So we can have people that have dyspraxia, or they used to call it, the old term for it was floppy baby syndrome. You can have different presentations of cerebral palsy, so ataxic cerebral palsy. You can have hemiplegia, monoplegia, quadriplegia. You can have apraxia, and apraxia is to do with the ability to have control of your movements, the ability for the brain and the body to be in sync. So you could have something like full body apraxia, which affects the whole body, or you can have a condition which is common in cerebral palsy called oral apraxia. You can have muscular dystrophy, and you could have hypermobility / Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Now, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome has got a prevalence on the autism spectrum, hence why I have put that there. So part of EDS could be hypermobility on its own. So you could have potentially low muscle tone, etc. But there are other forms of EDS because it's to do with collagen. So it's a genetic condition. So collagen is what glues and binds the body together. So in the more complex forms of EDS, it's not just to do with mobility. It can be to do with dangers of rupturing organs, dangers around apnea. So in extreme forms of EDS, you can get problems with respiratory failure. And other forms, I believe it's type 4, I'm thinking of, because there's 4 general types. You can have problems with cardiovascular, heart, and the veins and the arteries. Because if you think about the body, collagen is the glue that binds everything together. So part of the fruit salad of EDS could be in conjunction with a motor coordination challenge, a motor coordination disorder, or interchangeable with something else. So it could be riding along with something else, or it could be in the realm of genetics. So in the sense that if there's a collagen disorder that's passed down, it could be to do with genetics. There are many roads to Rome in terms of delays anyway, because there are different origin points to it. And not only are there different origin points for one thing, it's about understanding which one is relevant to your child. So we have social and emotional delays. So social and emotional delays could be having a specific diagnosis of autism or Asperger's syndrome. You may have seen my previous workshops where I've unpacked the different presentations of autisms rather than just saying autism in a singular sense. It's autisms, it's far more diverse in presentations. Then you can have ADHD or ADD. And I think it's important to bring up the other aspects of the shared sense of social. I've mentioned this in previous workshops. I think it's worth mentioning this and unpacking this when we look at autism. And if we think about the shared sense of social you see in non-autistic children, it's the ability to express and receive in real time. And it starts at around 5 years old, and it can develop as late as 9. But because of different information processing challenges, different information processing blockages, the person may not get a shared sense of social. Now, the person may be able to do all self, no other. So their own thoughts, their own feelings, it's almost like funneled, like on a turn track. And they're not able to get other, or they can do all other, no self. So you're switching that around. And the problem is this circular, this invisible synchronicity of the shared sense of social, which some people may misinterpret as being narcissistic, having problems with empathy or empathy erosion. It isn't that at all. It's to do with this shared sense of social and the duality of it, because it's going in this visible fluid circle. But for some people on the spectrum, they can either do one or the other. Living in the system of sensing, if someone is living or continues to live in the system of sensing, because all human beings are born into this system of sensing, the nervous system is naked, and what happens is that you go through this pathway of mergence. So you merge with people, you merge with places, you merge with objects, etc. So this mergence that you get with people is beyond the sort of standard information processing route. Speaking to a specialist in trauma and other areas, and she coined a word which I think is very real to what I'm trying to explain here, is biorhythms. So it's the ability to pick up frequencies from other people on an unconscious level. So the system of sensing is in effect living in a pre-conscious state where everything around you, what you filter, is someone's energy. So it's beyond what they're doing or what they're saying. It's about what's going on behind that. So that can bring up its own challenges. It can bring up its own benefits. It's kind of a mixture of the two. It may explain why some people on the autism spectrum find the interpretive world difficult, because the interpretive world is about applying association and in a more synchronized way. And if you're still living in that system of sensing, it may be hard to actually garner a sense of synchronicity with interpretation. Bearing in mind, this has got nothing to do with a lack of intelligence. It's to do with various different developmental and information processing blockages. When we look at speech, speech delay, there's different areas again. So we could look at something like oral apraxia, which is to do with the speech organs. So the person may have words in their head, words in their mind, but the mechanics of speech, if you think about the muscles and the jaw and the tongue and the throat and all the different nuanced areas of the mouth that you use to produce words, if it's not in sync, you can understand how speech delay can occur with its presentation as oral apraxia. You can get verbal agnosia, where the perception, the phonic perception of words, it is difficult to retrieve. So therefore, the person may have a more pattern, theme, and felt type of language, where they either create their own language or they take things from what they've seen. So let's use a more concrete example, such as TV shows, programs, etc., and they build up their own expressive associative language. And that may be to do with not getting the interpretive realm of language, but they are human beings nevertheless. So one must imagine how they're garnering their social emotional world, but also the way in which they're internalizing language. Anomic aphasia, or any type of aphasia, type of language processing disorder, in which the person is meaning deaf. So they're deaf to meaning. When I was young in infancy, I was about 80 to 90% meaning deaf. I was only getting about 20% meaning. So it really gives you an idea that speech delay can come from different areas. It can be to do with an issue around, or a challenge around actually speaking physically, or it could be both, or separate to an actual language processing disorder. Then you've got other types of language processing disorders or differences in which the person, let's say, is literal, and that can kind of marry up with social emotional agnosia, where the person doesn't see body language, see facial expression, or hear tone of voice, so atonia. So they may be literal. So that kind of gives you an idea of different presentations of delays. Now, delays on their own are specific, nuanced, but they can be a part of someone's autism. They can be a part of someone's autism trajectory and autism fruit salad, but equally, they can be something in their own right. It's looking at it from a three-dimensional perspective. Even if someone isn't on the autism spectrum, they may well have delays in the different areas that I've covered today. But equally, it could be part of someone's autism fruit salad that these different areas may relate to. So I hope I've made sense in breaking that down. Because this is a very short presentation with very specific areas of delays, I hope that I've given you enough information for you to reflect upon the people you work with, you yourself, and I'm thinking of the more broader aspects of early development, so children you work with, babies you work with, etc. And I must say, I'm looking forward to questions, because I think questions are going to really aid this, this topic further. So I thank you for listening, and I'll pass on to the Q&A session.
Thanks, Paul. Has anybody got any questions? I'm going to launch the poll while you're thinking about questions. And if you can fill that in as well, that would be good.
I'll just stop recording now.
Thanks, Pippa. I'm saying I'm going to launch the poll. It's now not doing anything. It was earlier.